This lesson is create a CRUD web page. The objectives for this lesson are to look at the CRUD web page, which was developed with Mustache, so I'll give you a quick overview of mustache.js. We'll talk about how the CRUD page is built, and then we'll do a quick code review. The intent of this lesson is to show you how the Fetch API is used in a real application. I'm not going to do a step-by-step in this lesson. I'm just going to really show you how this application is put together. But I do have a lab that builds this page, so you can do that on your own. So let's take a look at our CRUD web page in action. Underneath the samples folder, I created a new folder called People Maintenance, in which I created a new website with node.js and light-server. I added a scripts folder in here in which I've got common.js and people.js. I added a styles, and I have an index.html, and this is where everything happens. And what I've done is I've brought in Bootstrap, and I've also brought in my style sheet, which only has just a couple of things. And then I've got the body, and it's in here that we're going to see. We'll talk about this in a minute here, but let's take a look at what this looks like first. So when the browser comes up, you can see it has a people maintenance header. It has an add person, then has a table of data, and that data is the one coming from our people.json in our web API. Now I do have the ability to add, to edit, and delete. So if I were to click on add person here, you can see I can add a person and save it. Notice it says new person added. And then we go down to the bottom and we can see that new person. Let's go ahead and toggle over to our web API server. And if we take a look, you can see the new person has been added down here at the bottom of the people.json. And then we can edit this person. Maybe we change the first name. And we now save this. At the very top, you'll see the message appear briefly. It then goes back to our list, and you can see it got updated here. And once again, we go back to the web API, and you can see the change has been made in the people.json. And if we now go back to our browser again, the last functionality we have here is delete. So we can delete person 20. And over in the web API, you can see that person has been deleted. We now have a full working CRUD web page. So how did we get that table to be built out of that data coming back from the web API? Well, I wanted to use a JavaScript templating engine instead of just writing JavaScript. That gets a little messy. And there's a few of them out there, by the way. But what a templating engine does is it renders HTML for tokenized HTML that you store in a script tag, or you could even store in a JavaScript literal string if you wanted. The replaceable tokens typically look like this. They have an open curly brace twice, and then the name of the property that has the value that you wish to put into that location in the HTML, followed by two closing curly braces. And what you do is you feed the tokenized HTML and the array of data that you get from your web API service to Mustache. Mustache then renders the HTML by iterating over the array of data. And what it does is it then replaces all the tokens with the data in the property values for those properties. For more information on this, check out this link here to get full instructions on mustache.js. As a simple little example, let's take a look here where I've got a select ID equals people. And what we want to do is we want to fill that up with options. So I've got this script tag where I've set the ID equal to list template. The type, though, is text/HTML. It's not text/JavaScript, which you'd normally find on a script tag. You then see the double curly braces and then a pound list, and then you see a slash list at the end. Well, list is the name of the property that holds our array of data. Then inside of that, I'm putting what I want it to emit each time it iterates over this array. So each time I want an option with the value equal to the person ID, and then within the option and the closing option tag, I want the last name, comma, first name of my person. We make the call to get people data, just like we normally would. We process the response object, And then I'm going to call this method called render HTML. Well, this function takes your response. We create a variable that's a wrapper around this list property. Remember, list was what I had in that script tag. And I say I want the response.data. Well, that's our array of people, isn't it? So then we do let temp equals document.getElementById, grabbing that script tag, but just the inner HTML, so everything between the script and the closing script tag. Then let HTML equal mustache.render, passing in that template and the data. We can then do a document.getElementById on people. Remember, that's the select. And we can set its inner HTML equal to the HTML rendered by mustache. That then produces a drop-down list. So we're going to see all this in just a bit. Now our CRUD page, if you remember, I had quite a few things in there. The index.html uses Bootstrap. It uses our own site.css. It uses a common.js, a people.js, and mustache.js. People.js is where we make our web calls through the fetch API to our web API server to get data. The index.html page, it has the table for displaying a list of people, a form for displaying a single person, span tags for displaying informational or error messages, so you saw each one of these appear on that page at any different time. The tokenized HTML for the table is in that script tag that we're going to see in just a minute, and it references those 3 JavaScript files just like I said. Inside of the common.js, I have a closure called common. It's going to just simply toggle the HTML areas such as the list or the detail, or it displays those informational messages. It handles status codes such as 400, 404, 500, things like that, and will display an appropriate error message. So the common has things that I could reuse over and over again from page to page, or even from application to application. In the people.js, it contains a closure called people controller, and it's responsible for calling the web API using fetch. It creates a view model variable that you can see over here that has all these various properties to control how the index.html page works. It can display the table or detail with the mode property. So the mode property would be set to list or edit, for example, or add. It calls mustache to render the HTML. It has methods such as get entity, insert entity, update entity, and delete entity, as well as build list, that's the one that calls mustache, process response object, and things like that. So let's do just a quick review of the code. Again, my intent is not to dive into the specifics of all of this. I'm assuming you already know JavaScript and hopefully you know some sort of templating engine. But let's kind of just take a look at the key pieces, and that is where the fetch API is called. Just so you get an idea of where everything is, here's the index.html page. You can see here on lines 16 through 23 in there I've got a span that's informational messages and a span for error messages. I then have my button for adding a person, and notice how it's calling that closure people controller that I mentioned, and it has a .add method inside of there. We have a table where the people are. Notice the T body is empty. Remember, that's going to be filled in by mustache. I've got the form where we have all the input fields, and then I have the buttons save and cancel. They also call methods inside of that closure called people controller. I have my script tag here, which we talked about. It has the #list and then the /list. And in between there is everything we're going to do for each person that we have in our array coming back, along with an edit and a delete button that also calls methods in the people controller, passing in a person ID. This page must reference mustache, common.js, and our people.js. And when the window loads, we're going to call peoplecontroller.get. So let's go over and take a look at people.js. This is where everything happens. This is the main guy. So it's a closure called peoplecontroller. That's an immediately invoked function expression. I then define this variable VM, which is view model. And I have a list property, which holds the list of data. I have the entity. So when I'm in edit mode, that's where I'm holding the entity. I have the data, I have mode, I have an API URL, OK, status text, message, and last response, which is the actual response object that comes from the fetch API. So let's take a look at getting the data, right? So I'm going to get all of the people data. So I do my fetch, and then The first then is taking that response that comes back and processing that response object. So let's go take a look at this. So I actually have one here inside of people.js, but then it calls one over in common, and that is the one that we wrote throughout this course. Okay, so same exact one. That hasn't changed at all. Then after that, it takes data from that response object, the OK, the status text, the message, the data, and it also then, like I said, stores the original fetch API response object. And it returns that. It returns a view model. So that comes in. I can check to see if the view model is OK. And if it is, I'm going to take that view model.data. So data.data, and I'm going to put it into the view model.list. I then call build list. Now, build list is where we do all of that heavy lifting, right? So we're going to grab the text from that list template. That's the one in the script. Then I'm going to take the template, take that view model, and do a mustache.render on that template. So if you remember, the view model has the list. And if we look at our index here, what's it looking for? It's looking for a list property that it can iterate over. And the pound in front of that means iterate over this as an array. Once that's done, we have rendered HTML. We can go and look for the table called people. We can then grab the first element of tbody and replace its inner HTML with the HTML that was generated, and that then gives us our complete list that we want to then display. And I've got this common.display list. And if we come over here, we can take a look at common.js. This is where everything happens, but display list simply removes d-none, which is the bootstrap class that makes things invisible. It removes that, so the list becomes visible, and then it adds d-none to the detail. So that makes that one go away. So I'm only looking at the list or the detail. Now the rest of the code in the people.js, let me go to the very top here. It looks very similar. We're going to have things to handle errors, catching network errors. Get a single one. Look at that. I mean, it's just a fetch again. So everything's the same. All we're doing is in the second then is where we're kind of doing the logic to turn things off and on or set various inputs. Inserting, I created a request object called options, and then I put the method post. I set the JSON stringify of viewModel.entity into the body, and then we call the fetch. So all this is standard code. I don't think there's anything really too much different in here that from stuff that you would normally do in a real JavaScript application. There was one change that I made on the web API that we're going to show you, and that's how to automatically calculate the next person ID. If you remember, when I entered a new person, I didn't have to set the person ID, but it automatically made it number 20. So let's go over to the web API and take a look at how this works. Open up the people.repo.js and locate the insert method. This is where we read the file and we get the complete list of JSON data, and that comes into this variable RESP. What we do is we then do an RESP.map, and what we return is from that row, each row, the person ID. So this map gives us an array then of person IDs. Well, with that, it's really simple. I can let max ID equals math.max using the spread operator to say go across all of those IDs and add 1. That gives that next ID, right? So it calculates the maximum value, gives us one more than that. We assign that new person ID to the person ID of the new data that got passed into this insert method, and the rest of the code is exactly like we had before. We push that new data onto the array, and then we write the array back out to the people.json file. So just 3 lines of code, basically, to give us that functionality. So in this lesson, we saw a CRUD page, we learned a little bit about mustache.js, and we saw how the fetch is used in a real application. We inserted, we updated, and deleted people through this web page. Well, in this course, we learned that the fetch API is better than XML HTTP request because it's promise-based and object-oriented, more the way we like to do things today. It's easy to get data and easy to modify data, so definitely you want to take advantage of this new API. So where might you go from here? Well, maybe learn more about Node.js, learn more about Express and Light Server, maybe learn more about Mustache or other templating engines, or maybe even go learn .NET and minimal web API servers. In fact, I actually have a course on that on my channel as well. Speaking of which, please subscribe to my channel so you can get notifications every time I release new material.